Teams that are good, not great in today's NHL get stuck. Last year's Edmonton Oilers, textbook example.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run every day this MLB season. On today's show, we are going to get into the weeds. This will be a very meta and philosophical conversation about the state of play for NHL teams that are good but have clear defects. We're going to start out today's show talking a little bit about why NHL teams get stuck both narratively and roster-wise. In our middle segment, we'll apply that conversation to the 25-26 Edmonton Oilers. And then to round out today's show, we'll do some lessons, some big picture takeaways. But I wanted to start out with this idea because I find it eminently interesting in the sense we are all operating at this maximum efficiency culture. The idea across the board, across industry, is to produce as much as possible while doing as little as possible, while using as little as possible. And that puts a lot of people under immense stress. And because of that idea, there is a real impetus to grow wherever you can find margins, wherever you can find competitive edges. And when you think about what it's like to be a good but not great team in today's NHL, a lot of teams get stuck in that middle, and not necessarily the mushy middle where teams like the Seattle Kraken seem doomed to spend an eternity. But a lot of teams across the league enter every given NHL season with no chance of winning the Stanley Cup or a very small chance. Of course, there are funky things that happen. You do have outlier seasons. You do have funky playoffs where on occasion the underdogs do go on a heater and they win things. But the way you have to think about this, especially when we're talking about why teams might leverage a little bit of the future, even in years they aren't very good, is because the NHL in particular is a gate revenue driven league. And when I say gate revenue, I mean that's butts in seats. More than any of the other major North American sports, more than football, more than basketball, and more than baseball, the NHL depends on people buying tickets, putting their butts in the seats. Because the other leagues have significantly bigger television deals, they don't need to make as much money from ticket sales. But the NHL, by virtue of being a little bit of a smaller league, by not having as much demand for its television rights, needs to make up that money elsewhere. Part of why the NHL has grown slower over the last decade in comparison to the other leagues is that lack of TV revenue and the fact that the NHL revenues at large are more subject to the ebbs and flows of the general public. You think about how things are going right now in the state of the world and how bad inflation is hitting people's pockets. That discretionary money you might have put aside to go to a game or two, to buy stuff at a game, to buy a jersey, you can't have that extra money when you have to pay for groceries and gas and all of the stuff you have been buying your entire life slowly keeps creeping up and up and up. And all of a sudden, it's why would I spend $80 a ticket for me, my significant other, or one of my friends, if I have kids? Why would I spend that much money on an experience that is ultimately going to be inconsequential because that is just one of 84 regular season games, especially if my team isn't very good. And that in of itself creates the conundrum we face today, where when you look at the way NHL teams operate, especially ones who are playoff good but not Stanley Cup good, they are incentivized by the way the NHL makes money to continue to fight to be in that mushy middle. The teams in today's league who largely exist just to get into the playoffs, to get 2 home playoff games, even if they get swept out of the first round, and make that extra couple $1 million a gate for 2 games, that is a driving consideration for a lot of the decisions that get made across the league. And it compresses things to some degree. And that mindset of just get in is robust throughout this league. And I want to point this out It is really hard to go on the Cinderella run in the NHL. I know we have this perception of upsets and the playoffs being this great equalizer because anything can happen in small samples. For the most part, in the contemporary NHL, the best team, the higher seeded team, wins the playoff series almost 2/3 of the time. While you do still have your occasional upsets, the way that middle class of the NHL operates, where it is so determined to just make the playoffs, and then once they get there, they're just happy to be there. Those are the teams, like perhaps the LA Kings last year, that played pretty good defense against the Colorado Avalanche in that first round playoff series and never had a chance, could not score enough to even make that a competitive series. And when you have a really thick group of teams in that middle who play a defense first, goalie centric style that's about shortening games, getting to overtime, getting to shootouts, banking loser points, it is giving people a false sense of progress. And I do think that can be the case sometimes where we watch a lot of decision makers, GMs, owners, coaches, president of hockey ops look and say, my team made the playoffs last year. We were a good team. And it is good to make the playoffs more often than not. To be a consistent playoff contender shows that you have established a baseline level of competency. But I could very easily sit here and argue a lot of teams would be better served by taking a year back, taking an active step back to start planning ahead and load up again for a subsequent year. The reason you don't see teams do that unless they are going to embark on a multi-year, full-throated, tear it down to the studs rebuild, a la the Sharks, a la the Blackhawks, is because teams need revenue. Teams need butts in seats. How are you as an NHL team going to ask your fans to pay $80 to $100 per ticket for X number of games when you're going to come out and actively say, we know we're not going to be very good this year. We know we're going to try and make the playoffs, but it's going to take a miracle run to win a championship. You're turning your fan base off at that point. And that is why you have a lot of NHL teams that are incentivized to push for that middle, to just be good enough that you can keep your fan base engaged, to get people to come to games. And that ultimately drives a lot of decisions and why you watch a lot of teams that would be better served by being strategic and picking their spots, making really risky leverage plays. I would point you in the direction of the New York Islanders last year, who were in a playoff spot for a good chunk of the season, made some really bad trades for Braden Shen, for Andre Palat, for Carson Soucy, all of whom really struggled upon arriving on Long Island because that was a team that really wanted to get back into the playoffs this year, that thought, hey, if we're right there with our goalie, with our team defense, we think we can make something happen if we could just get in. Of course, that is not what ultimately happened. The Islanders fired Patrick Waugh with 4 regular season games remaining. Excuse me, I was thinking of Tortorella and Pete and Bruce Cassidy. 4 games remaining. They fire Patrick Waugh. They do hire Pete DeBoer. They miss the playoffs. They are stuck with bad players in Andre Palat. That Braden Shen contract does not look very good, and Shen looked almost entirely cooked as an NHL player last year in his stint as an Islander. But that's the example here, where a team like the Islanders that could have just taken the goodwill of overachieving a little bit relative to their expectations and then come into this season, the one that's going to start in a few weeks, this 26-27 season, with a more open-minded of we are building something gradually here around Matthew Schaefer. Instead, the Islanders wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and they made a mistake. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we return, I will explain to you why the 2025-2026 Edmonton Oilers are a textbook example of this conundrum right after this. Locked On Oilers is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a home run today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games. Whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league, every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction. Any given day when you open FanDuel, you are going to see Kyle Schwarber as the presumptive favorite to hit a home run that day. For example, I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon. He is priced at minus 135, meaning if you were to bet $135, you would win $100. Yordan Alvarez of the Houston Astros is up there. Matt Olson of the Atlanta Braves. Junior Caminero of the Tampa Bay Rays. Ben Rice of the Yankees. And of course, Shohei Ohtani. So if you're ready to get in the mix, FanDuel has one question. What are you waiting for? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we discuss why the Oilers last year ended up in that no man's land where they couldn't break through. They couldn't go on a long winning streak. They could never really build sustained momentum and make progress as a team. You know, you think about over the course of an 82 game regular season that the team is going to make incremental progress, that as the season goes along, guys are going to grow into roles, players are going to find where they fit in the lineup, and that's going to allow the team to build some competency. And as the season goes along, that baseline level of competency improves. That's why by the time the playoffs roll around, the league's best teams are firing on all cylinders. The teams that get into the playoffs playing good hockey already can only build up from there. That's why the idea of we're going to limp our way into the playoffs, and if we just get in, anything can happen, is foolhardy to some degree. I think when you're a team like the Kings, who's just the last team in, I think your opportunity to upset a team like the Avalanche was next to nil last year, and in a clean sweep, the Avalanche thoroughly outplayed them. And I wanted to point out, over the last 15 years or so, we have had a very heavy concentration of Stanley Cup champions from a handful of recurring teams. The Kings, not the St. Louis Blues recurring, but the Kings, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Florida Panthers. We have consistently seen teams with superstar level talent build sustainable cores around their best players for a number of years and keep going back to the well. When you think about the miracle runs, the big upsets, the underdogs, what do we have in our conscious memory? 3 years ago, the Florida Panthers, the wild card team, made the playoffs one of the last days of the regular season. They upset the Bruins in the first round. They win, I believe it was 2 games in overtime in that first round series. They go on the miracle run all the way to the Stanley Cup final where Sergei Bobrovsky is incredible. They have all of the overtime winners. I believe they won 5 games in overtime over the course of the 3 playoff series leading up to the Stanley Cup final. But when they got to that Cup final, Vegas was so much far and away better than them. They didn't have much of a chance. If you want to think about a team in a wild card spot, or if we're going back to the old format, which we are in the case of the 2012 LA Kings, a team in the 7 or 8 seed in the 1 through 8 seeding winning the Stanley Cup. The last time it happened was the Devils. If you want to win the Stanley Cup, you almost have to be one of the 3 teams in a divisional playoff spot associated with the Pacific, Central, Metro, or Atlantic, etc. Now, I bring up the Oilers as being a really good example of this conundrum because I think there's no clearer example. And the Oilers, there's levels to it. It's not just we have expensive tickets. We can't tell our fans, hey, it's a rebuilding year. You also have the ticking clocks of Connor McDavid and of Leon Draisaitl. I think the inescapable fact that the Oilers have 2 of the 5 best players in the world on the same team and have yet to win a Stanley Cup is a looming clock that hangs over all of our heads. There is a real impetus here that you cannot waste a season. And I understand it from that perspective, that if you're Stan Bowman coming out and telling Connor and Leon, hey guys, I know we just went to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals and we came really close to winning at one of them, but we need to punt this year because we need to develop Matt Savoie and Ike Howard. We need to save some draft picks and actually use our draft picks because we are burning it at both ends of the candle. We have spent too many draft picks and too many prospects on trying to build a team out around you. We have spent too much time in the bargain bins of free agency, gambling on reclamation projects and losing. It is a real challenge if you are a general manager to make that type of rational level-headed decision, because sports are not rational. Sports are fundamentally emotional, and there is no greater emotion that we think of when it comes to sports than the lengths you're willing to go if you're going to win. And that's why you see every single year general managers on bubble teams burn first-round picks on expiring contract defensemen, on guys who used to be 25 or 30 goal scorers who are going to play third-line roles. Because if you objectively, I said it going into the 25-26 season, the Oilers were going to take a step back. The talent was not established. They were going to need guys to grow into roles over the course of the season. Matt Savoie ultimately did. It took until about the Olympic break. Once he came back from the Olympic break, I believe it was 19 points in 23 regular season games post-Olympics. That's great. If Matt Savoie can be a 60-point player this upcoming season, that is a massive shot in the arm for the opportunities of this Oilers team. But last year, knowing that you needed Savoie to work out, you needed Ike Howard to work out, you took a gamble on Trent Frederick, you took a gamble on Andrew Mangiapane, you gambled in season on Tristan Jarry. You think about all of those compounding decisions and the amount of risk the Oilers took on last year, with the idea being if all of these contingencies work out for us, we are going to be Stanley Cup caliber good. That doesn't even get into the fact that they traded multiple draft picks to get Connor Murphy and Jason Dickinson. While I think Dickinson and Murphy will both play good roles on this Oiler team this upcoming season, and part of the reason I think they are in much better shape to start the year this year versus last year, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have had to make the trades to go and bring those guys in, because you would have accepted, hey, even if we get these guys on the team, it's probably going to take a lot for us to even get out of the West, let alone to make the Stanley Cup final and win the whole thing. But again, if you're Stan Bowman, you can't tell your season ticket holders and you can't tell Connor and Leon, hey guys, we have to punt this year. We like our team. We're not bad, but we are not good enough to win. So we have to wait. And you can't do that. And this gets to the fundamental issue of this tier of team that can make the playoffs, maybe win a round, maybe two at the most. But when you have that defined ceiling, are you better off taking the calculated step back and saying, hey, these are expiring contracts. Let's try and get some assets for those guys. We're not going to buy at the deadline. We're not going to burn first round picks on guys who are rentals, who we might not even be able to afford to keep. Now, the Oilers were able to bring back both Murphy and Dickinson, so it's not exactly as dire as it would have been if both were rentals and they ultimately left anyway. But the Oilers are really in an awkward position now, because on paper, they are probably the fourth or fifth best team in the Western Conference. They are probably the second best team in the Pacific Division. That's not a bad place to be necessarily, but it does mean you're going to have to beat one of Anaheim, San Jose, the Kings, the Kraken. I don't think the Kraken are making the playoffs, but for argument's sake, you're going to have to beat one of those teams. Then you're going to have to beat Vegas. Then you're going to have to beat whoever comes out of the Central, whether that's Minnesota, whether that's Dallas, whether that's Colorado. You, as the Pacific Division, have an inherent advantage. Part of the reason the Oilers were able to go to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals is the fact that going through the Pacific Division was an easier path than it would have been if they were a wild card team, or if they were one of the teams seeded in the Central Division, the way Dallas and Minnesota have taken turns beating up on each other. Same thing with Colorado as well, in that mix of that triad where those teams have all beaten each other up. But you have to accept that it is going to be hard. Even now, with all of the additions, with the improvements, I think the Oilers are a better team on paper far and away than the start of last year. But I still don't think they're Stanley Cup good. I still think they're at least one, if not two, top 6 wingers away from being in that tier of team. But again, we cannot say that. We have to carry ourselves with the idea that if we just get in, Connor and Leon can elevate their games, and that will be enough to rise the tide of all the other boats on this team. We are going to take a second and final break on today's show. When we come back, we will do some big picture takeaways and lessons right after this. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers as we talk about the conundrum the Oilers face, and that a lot of teams who probably can't win the Stanley Cup but can make the playoffs face. Because we know every year, and this is not groundbreaking analysis, every year only one team can win the Stanley Cup. With only one team capable of winning the championship in any given season, there is a real idea or impetus that if you don't win a championship, it's a failure. It's a lost season. And last year, based on the team the Oilers had, that was not a realistic expectation. I did not see a world where last year's Oilers team was capable of winning a championship, even if everybody played up to their abilities, because they didn't have the forward depth, the goaltending was a mess, and the defense was too leaky, especially once you got past that first pair. Now, I still think the team right now is better than last year. I think we overlook how long Zach Hyman was out to start the year, didn't make his debut in season last year till mid-November. That's really when McDavid started going. McDavid went on that nuclear heater starting at the end of November through early January, where he was 2 points per game, more or less. And that helps a lot. When you have stars like McDavid, like Draisaitl, you can talk yourself into, well, if we just get in and one of those guys gets going, Connor McDavid's the guy who had 41 points in 25 playoff games 2 years ago and almost willed the team back from a 3-0 deficit to win the Stanley Cup and what would have been the greatest comeback in the history of the NHL playoffs, and frankly, maybe the greatest playoff in the history of North American sports, because they were down 3-0 and they forced it all the way to a 7, and they played pretty well in that game 7 before ultimately cracking. But when it comes to lessons, I think the big key is a sense of media literacy and understanding that a lot of public messaging, especially when it comes to fan activation, is tied around the idea of you want to be a part of this, that if they do it, if they overachieve, if they do better than you expect, they're going to be special. And if you show you believe by buying tickets, by buying jerseys, by buying merchandise, you are a part of it. You believed when no one else did. And while I subscribe to that, the romantic element of nobody believes on us is very true. I just went through it with the Knicks in the playoffs before they won the title. Going through round after round as they started to build momentum, and they went really on that nuclear run where they had won 10 straight between the 2 rounds and then the finals between Cleveland, Philly, and then the first 2 games of the Spurs series. Nobody believes in us is powerful, but you need to have a certain baseline level of competitiveness to make that extra oomph associated with nobody believes in us enough to push you over the finish line. It's not enough in of itself to sustain a championship. You have to be pretty good already for nobody believes in us to work. And I wanted to bring it all the way back around and looking at it from purely the fan perspective. On a lot of levels, our favorite teams are asking us, hey, you are no guarantee of happiness, of success, but you, year after year, dollar after dollar, brick by brick, are being a part of something bigger than you. And that community feeling and that sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself, it does matter. It is a part of what fandom means to people, and it makes them feel like they can accomplish things, and people use sports as a sense of self-inspiration. But you look at the way a majority of the teams in this league are set up right now, they are going to come into this upcoming season with next to no chance, where they will need miraculous or outright impossible odds to break their way to win the whole thing. And we still need to make room for those other seasons. The ones where you don't win, where the ones where you don't win become the sliding doors moments, because how you react to those failures defines a lot of what you need to work on. The Oilers this past year thought their defense, and when I say defense, I mean team defense, not just their defensemen, was subpar. And they really re-emphasized trying to rebuild the group, orienting the bottom 6 around Jason Dickinson. Maybe you see a little more of that Colton Dock and Connor Clattenburg style of fourth line this upcoming season. And you think about getting Ryan Shea and you bringing back Connor Murphy and a real full-scale effort to improve the defense. Again, I still don't think the group they're going to run with this year, even with a trade deadline addition or 2, is going to be on the tier of what Colorado or Dallas or frankly maybe even Minnesota bring to the table. I struggle to see a world where the Oilers are going to be able to compete with Vegas's depth, especially the further down the lineup you go. And I don't like wasting time. And I don't think I've wasted time in watching the Oilers, especially last year, where I felt that the Oilers really came against a sense of their own mortality to some degree. The idea that, hey, we really took it on the chin. We couldn't get our regular season together. By the time we made the playoffs, we weren't really a cohesive group. We suffered a bunch of injuries in that playoff series, and it put us in a really difficult position where we were up against a younger, hungrier Anaheim team. We didn't have the health. We didn't have the guys, and they made us look bad. They beat us in 6 games, and we needed to rethink how we built our team, and we really needed to change things. And the Oilers are tinkering around the edges. And if you want to make the devil's argument, if you want to play devil's advocate here, you would say, well, the Oilers are in a position to tank. They're not going to rebuild, so they have to try. Sure, I agree with you. There's no world in which you have Connor and Leon on the team and you are not trying to win the Stanley Cup. I understand it from a narrative perspective. That's also just not how reality works. We have watched for the last decade as the Oilers have ran out 2 of the 5 best players over the last 10 years, and they have not won a Stanley Cup yet. That's not to say they won't ever, but I think we are reaching an impasse in this vision of every year, because this team does not graduate prospects, which means they are always in the free agency bargain bin. They are always in the trade market. It is really hard to improve your team without having that pipeline of young in-house talent to keep costs down and to develop into potential impact players. And the last thing I'll give you before I round out today's show, this is a better roster than last year. I agree. When you look at this team and you go guy by guy, if you're talking about the potential of an Ike Howard, McDavid, Hyman, and then Podkolzin, Draisaitl, Savoie, and then Nugent-Hopkins, Dickinson, and whomsoever you want on the right there, that's a much better top 9 than what the Oilers were playing last year. Trent Frederik in a smaller role. No Adam Henrique, who I thought was really disappointing last year. No Janmark, who I think his limitations offensively are becoming basically unplayable from anything more than a 4th line perspective, even though a lot of coaches like his game because of the skating and the defense. But the Oilers are still asking you to take a lot on faith right now. They are asking you to believe that Tristan Jarry, Frederik Andersen, and Devon Levi are going to be able to make 84 starts between the 3 of them this year. If you just go by what they have done the last couple of years on average, you're probably asking all 3 of those guys to do something they haven't done in a while in the case of Andersen or Jarry, or ever before in the case of Devon Levi. Now, you can make the probability of success better in those cases by putting a better team around them, by focusing more on defense, rounding out your 5-on-5 game, which I do think the Oilers have actively done. I think the Oilers are asking you to take it on faith that Ike Howard is ready to be a 15 to 20 goal scorer this year. He was really good in the AHL last year, but he definitely didn't have the hockey sense yet at the NHL level in the games he did play, even though he was very confident. He wanted the puck a lot. He took a lot of shots whenever he got the puck. Wasn't necessarily in the best places on ice to shoot from. And I do think with time, those instincts and that positioning will improve, but the Oilers need time for that. I think they are asking you to bank that Ryan Shea is going to be able to do what he did last year in Pittsburgh for the first time in his career. Again, that is not a guarantee. The Oilers are asking you to take it on faith that Trent Frederik will be healthy and actually provide something of value in the bottom 6. They are asking you to take it on faith that Jake Wallman will be healthy and be a net positive on the team, unlike last year. The more ifs I keep having to add to how the Oilers are Stanley Cup contenders, the less likely it is. They are not a bad team, but I do not think they are a Stanley Cup contender, even though they say they are. We are going to call it a show there. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 stream sports podcast network. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL Game Night, where the NHL season never ends. For your second watch of the day, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On YouTube channel. I will talk to you guys real soon. Until then, let's go Oilers.